Arion's journey strength, focus, and courage. In the distant kingdom of Elandor, the golden glow of the hills and the whispers of the forests hid ancient secrets. It was a peaceful place where people lived in harmony with nature and with each other. However, it hadn't always been this way. In ancient times, Elandor had been the battleground of heroes and monsters. Great stone walls and ruins and old tales told around campfires were all that remained of the epic struggles. But for Arion, a young man from the village of Thalor, these tales were more than just stories. They were promises that he too would one day be called upon to prove his worth. Dreams of glory and the shadow of destiny. Since childhood, Arion dreamed of adventure. He imagined himself facing dragons, rescuing kingdoms, and being remembered in songs. But the reality of his life was very different. He was just the son of a blacksmith, working every day in the stifling heat of his father's forge. Although he was strong for his age, Arion was not known for his combat skills. Even so, the flame of desire for glory never faded within him. His village, Thalor, was peaceful, but there was a sense of unease in the air. The harvests were no longer as bountiful, and wild animals ventured closer to the houses. People spoke of bad omens, of a growing darkness in the Zephyr Mountains. But no one could predict what was to come. The Awakening of Drakkar. One night while everyone slept, a tremor shook the ground of Elandor. Arion was awakened by the sound of rocks clashing and the wind howling in an unusual way. Looking to the horizon, he saw an orange light glowing in the distant mountains. A feeling of dread gripped his heart. He knew at that moment something terrible had awakened. Days later, a messenger arrived in the village with alarming news. Deep within the Zephyr Mountains, Drakkar, an ancient and feared creature, had awakened from its long slumber. Drakkar was a legend as old as the kingdom itself, a massive creature, a mix of dragon and serpent, whose scales were said to be impenetrable and whose fiery breath could melt even the toughest stone. The creature had begun to move toward the nearby villages, destroying everything in its path. The neighboring kingdoms were in panic. The king of Elandor, unable to send an army powerful enough to stop Drakkar, summoned all the brave young men of the kingdom, hoping that among them, someone could defeat the beast. Arion knew this was his chance. The desire to prove his strength consumed him. He looked at his father and said, "I must go." Although reluctant, Arion's father knew that his son had always dreamed of great deeds. He embraced him and gave him an amulet, a small green glowing stone that had belonged to his mother who had passed away many years ago. "This will bring you luck and courage," his father said, tears in his eyes. The first trial. Inner strength. The first stage of Arion's journey took him to the dreaded dark forest, a place where the bravest warriors were tested to their limits. The forest was dense and silent, except for the occasional distant growl of wild beasts. Twisted tree branches blocked out the sun, creating a dark and oppressive environment. Many said the forest was alive, feeding off the fear of those who dared to cross it. Walking cautiously, Arion soon encountered his first obstacle. A fallen ancient tree blocked the path, but this was no ordinary tree. Its roots seemed to be anchored in the very earth with an invisible force. Near it stood an old man with piercing eyes dressed in rags that resembled the garb of a blacksmith. "Only those with true strength may continue," said the old man, watching Arion closely. The young man tried to push the trunk with all his might, but it was like trying to move a mountain. The old blacksmith merely shook his head. "Strength is not just in muscles. It lies in your will, in your persistence in the face of adversity." Feeling defeated, Arion stepped back. He recalled the many times in life he had wanted to give up but had always pushed forward, even when no one believed in him. Inspired, he began to work. Instead of trying to lift the trunk all at once, he started clearing small branches, using the sword he had forged with his father to cut roots. His physical strength was limited, but his determination was not. Days passed, and finally Arion had cleared enough of the path to move forward. When he emerged from the other side of the forest, exhausted but victorious, the old blacksmith gave him a mysterious smile. before disappearing into the shadows. Arion realized that true strength wasn't just physical, it lay in his ability to persevere, even when everything seemed impossible. The challenge of focus. Leaving the forest behind, Arion arrived at the desert of the mind, an endless stretch of golden sand that flowed like water under the wind. There were no landmarks. The desert confused even the most experienced travelers. It was said that the desert of the mind created illusions, toying with the thoughts of travelers, making them question their own reality. Those who lost focus were never seen again. Arion walked for hours under the scorching sun until he began to see figures in the distance. At first he thought they were other travelers, but as he got closer, he realized the figures were familiar. He saw his mother, lost when he was just a child, waving to him. He felt tempted to run toward her, but then he heard another voice, that of his father, calling him back to the village. Confused and torn, Arion fell to his knees. He wanted to believe these people were real, that he could return home and find the peace he had always sought. But something inside him told him this was just a mirage. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Arion focused his mind on one thought, Drakkar. He remembered his mission, the danger Drakkar posed to the kingdom, and the sacrifice he would need to make to save his land. Focus, he realized, was about not being distracted, even by the things he loved most. When he opened his eyes, the figures had disappeared, and the desert was calm. With his mind clear and his goal firm, Arion continued walking. The final test. Courage. Finally, Arion reached the Zephyr Mountains, where the winds blew so fiercely they nearly tore off his cloak. The path was treacherous, with steep cliffs and slippery snow covering the land. But worse than the cold was the fear. As he climbed, Arion heard stories of warriors who had faced Drakkar but had never returned. The thought of becoming just another forgotten name in songs filled his heart with doubt. High in the mountains, he found a small cabin where an old woman lived alone. "I know why you're here," she said, offering him shelter from the wind. "Many have come before you, and they all failed because they let fear consume them. Drakkar cannot be defeated by strength or focus alone. He feeds on the fear of those who face him." Arion spent the night reflecting on her words. He realized that throughout the journey, fear had been with him, but he had kept it at bay. However, facing it directly was something different. He had to learn to accept fear, not let it control him. That was what the old woman meant. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to continue despite it. The final battle with Drakkar. At dawn, Arion approached Drakkar's cave. Inside, the darkness was total, except for the fiery glow of the beast's eyes. When Drakkar emerged from the shadows, its size was unimaginable. Its body, covered in metallic scales, gleamed under the light of the fire it breathed. An earth-shattering roar echoed through the mountain. For a brief moment, fear gripped Arion, but he remembered everything he had learned, the strength he had forged in the dark forest, the focus he had honed in the desert of the mind, and the courage he now embraced in his heart. Holding his sword tightly, he advanced toward the creature. The battle was fierce. Drakkar attacked with fire and claws, but Arion, with absolute focus, dodged and struck with precision. Each blow filled him with more courage. No matter how difficult the battle became, he did not allow fear to overwhelm him. In a decisive moment, Drakkar prepared to unleash a devastating blast of fire. But Arion, with all the strength left in his body, leaped and drove his sword into the beast's heart. Drakkar's final roar echoed through the mountains, but soon fell silent. The creature had been defeated. Exhausted but victorious, Arion stood in the cave, feeling the weight of his journey. He was no longer the dreamer from the village. Now he was a hero who embodied strength, focus, and courage. The triumphant return. When Arion returned to the kingdom, he was met with applause and honors. The king granted him the title of Guardian of Elandor, and his story was told for generations. However, Arion knew that the true reward was not the title or recognition, but the transformation that had occurred within him. He had discovered that true strength came from overcoming hardships, focus came from clarity of purpose, and courage was finding bravery in the midst of fear. And so, the kingdom of Elandor remained safe, protected by a hero,